Hi everyone, welcome back to the Edgewater Avenue YouTube channel. Today we are going to be making the Frankie one piece. This pattern comes with a few different options. When you download the pattern, you'll notice that there's one zip file that's labeled double D plus, and there's one that does not have that label. So the first choice you'll have to make is whether or not you want the double D plus version. That version has a dart in the bust that's gonna allow for a lot more room for bust volume. So measure your under bust and then measure your full bust, and if there's a difference of more than 7 inches, I would recommend the double D plus. Or if you just want something with a dart, you can also use that version. Just be aware that it is drafted for a decent amount of bust volume, 7 or more inches. And so if you have a smaller difference in under bust to bust, you might want to reduce the size of that dart. But yeah, it's your swimsuit. Even if you have a bust under bust difference of 7 inches or more and you don't want a dart, make whatever you want, but it is there if you want it. Then in each file, there is a cheeky version and a full coverage version. So you'll want to choose which of those bum coverages you prefer. And the last option is this swimsuit can be made with or without the ties that go along the waist. If you don't want to do the ties and you just want a basic square neck one piece, then you can skip all the steps that have to do with the ties. For materials, you will need 1.5 yards of regular swimwear fabric, 1/4 inch swimwear elastic, and then you will also need your typical sewing supplies, cutting tools, pins, etc. That is all you need. This is absolutely not a difficult piece to make. You can probably whip it up in less than an hour depending on your skill level. To start off with cutting, you're going to cut 2 on the fold in your front piece. If you're making a version that includes a bust dart, you are not going to cut out the dart at this time. Just skip right past it. Do not cut it out yet. You are also going to cut 2 on the fold in your back piece. And then you're going to cut 4 pieces mirrored of your waist ties. And once you're finished with cutting, we can begin construction. So first we'll work on prepping our pieces, beginning with the darts. If you're not making darts, you can skip this step and go to the following timestamp. First, cut out the dart on your paper pattern. Then place the pattern onto your cut pieces and trace the dart legs on both sides. You'll do this with both the lining and the main piece, and there's dart on the left and the right. These lines that you're tracing are the actual seam line. So when you go to sew the dart, you're going to want to stitch right on top of these lines we just drew. So fold the darts with right sides together so that the dart legs line up. Then using a straight stitch or a stretch stitch of your choice, sew along the dart legs. Repeat this with all 4 of the darts. Afterwards, take some scissors and trim the excess. Then the other piece of prep that we need to do that I did not film is transfer our notches from our pattern pieces onto our cut pieces. So if you're making the waist ties, there are some notches on the waist part of those ties. So you'll want to snip into your 1/4 inch seam allowance to mark those, or just use a washable pen. Now we are all prepped and we're going to start off our construction by sewing the waist ties. So match up the ties so right sides are together. We are going to sew along these 3 sides of the ties. Here I will not be attaching elastic, but that is up to you. And before I go in with my overlocker, I'm first going to do a basting stitch. Ties like this can be tricky to sew, so basting them together before doing the final stitch really helps to make sure these pieces are lining up and laying flat. So once these pieces are basted, I'm going to go over to my serger and sew my final stitch. Here I'm using a 4-thread overlock stitch, and I'm using regular polyester thread. Then we're going to sew all of our elasticized seams. So match the front piece with right sides together and sew along the leg holes, neckline, and armholes. You will also match the back piece with right sides together and sew along the leg holes, neckline, and armholes. Again, I will be basting these pieces before I go in with my elastic and my overlock stitch. If you don't have an overlocker, you can do a zigzag stitch or any stretch stitch on a regular machine. Basting is especially important before you go in with your elastic. It just gets everything tacked together and in place so that you have less of a chance of messing up your elastic. So after my pieces are basted, I'm gonna go in with a 4-thread overlock stitch again and attach elastic at the same time. When sewing this elastic, you do not want to stretch at all. You want the elastic to be equal to the seam length. If you have questions on how to sew this elastic or you need some tips, I will link my elastic series here. It is a must watch if you really want to nail elastic application for swimwear. Now everything is sewn and we are going to take our waist ties to the right side. We're going to use a basting stitch again and we are going to sew closed these open ends. And while we're there, we're also going to take our front piece to the right side and we're going to use a basting stitch and sew closed the shoulder strap, the gusset, and both of the sides. This is going to make fabric management in the next couple steps much easier. And even if you're not doing the waist ties, I do recommend basting closed the areas on this front piece. So once you've basted these areas, you are now going to line up your waist ties and sew them on. So match up your notches and pin down each waist tie. They should fit nicely on the curve of the waist, but it does not have to be perfect at all. When we go to attach the sides, we will kind of correct that. So using a straight stitch of any length, tack down the waist ties onto the front panel. Remember that there is a 1/4 inch of seam allowance, so when you're tacking these down, you'll want to be inside of that. And this is not our final side seam, so it doesn't have to be like a super secure stitch. We might end up trimming off this stitch in the next step, but you don't want it to come unraveled, so it might be worth back stitching on this one. After the ties are attached, you can loosely tie them up. Now our next objective is to attach the front and the back. So keep your back piece so it's inside out, and insert the front piece inside of the back. Line up and pin each of the shoulder straps, the gusset, and both of the sides. Then, using a straight stitch or a stretch stitch, sew down across all 4 layers of fabric to attach the front and the back, at the shoulder straps, the gusset, and both of the sides. So this is why we basted the front panel closed in the previous step. It makes it much easier to sew across 4 layers of fabric. Even still, I like to do another basting stitch going across the 4 layers. You're better safe than sorry, and then when you go to do your final stitch, you can have confidence that it's going to look good. After you've sewn these seams, take out some scissors and trim the excess for a nice clean finish. So now we just need to take our piece to the right side, so get out your seam ripper. Rip a hole that's about 2 to 3 inches, but make it as small as you can manage. I like to put this hole down by the gusset so it's less noticeable, but over by the armpit is another good spot. And through this hole, you're going to take everything to the right side. So that's why it has to be around 2 to 3 inches, but if you can pull everything through with a smaller hole, by all means. Once you've done that, you'll finish off your hole either by top stitching or you can stitch it by hand with an invisible stitch. Tie up your waist ties and you have finished the Frankie one piece. Here is how it turned out. Thank you for watching. Be sure to grab the Frankie one piece sewing pattern on my website now, and I will see you next time.